Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
This time, it's all about tipping points, based on all the amazing stuff you sent in about Malcolm Gladwell's book.
It looks like.
Quotes, research summaries.
Yeah, definitely.
You guys are ready to go deep on how things go viral, which I am totally here for.
That's awesome. And I think it's super cool that we're not just going to scratch the surface on what a tipping point is, but we're really going to dig into those amazing examples that Gladwell gives.
Right.
And really unpack the why
Yeah.
behind these sudden changes.
Love it. Okay, before we go too far, let's make sure we're all starting from the same place.
Sure.
How does Gladwell actually define a tipping point in his book?
Well, he describes it as
Good
that
stuff.
moment when an idea or a trend or a behavior,
Okay.
it crosses this threshold and spreads really rapidly, almost like, an epidemic.
Oh, interesting.
It's kind of like reaching that critical mass
Yeah.
where change just becomes unstoppable.
Yeah, makes sense. Actually, one of the sources that you all sent in had this super striking analogy about this.
Oh, cool.
It talked about folding a piece of paper in half
Okay.
and then in half again, and you do that 50 times total.
50 times. Wow.
Any guesses how tall that stack of paper would be?
I mean, I would think it'd be pretty tall.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know, the height of a house or even a skyscraper, maybe.
Right. You'd think so, right?
Totally.
But the reality is way more mind-blowing. That stack of paper, folded 50 times, would actually reach the sun.
Whoa. No way.
Yeah. It's crazy, right?
That's insane. It's such a great illustration of just the power
Yeah.
of that exponential growth
Totally.
that you see with tipping points.
Like those small actions can lead to massive results, which is pretty awesome.
It really is.
So then how do we get to these tipping points? What forces are at work here?
Well, Gladwell lays out 3 key rules, basically,
Great.
that drive these moments of sudden change.
Okay.
The law of the few, the stickiness factor, and then the power of context.
Okay, I love a good framework. Right.
So let's break down each of those one by one,
Definitely.
starting with the law of the few.
Okay.
Who are these few?
Yeah.
And why are they so important to tipping points?
Well, think back to that paper analogy we were just talking about.
Yeah.
It's not every single sheet of paper that reaches the sun. It's
Oh, right.
it's those specific folds, the way they build on each other, that creates that exponential growth, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Similarly, when we think about social epidemics,
Mm-hmm.
certain individuals have a much bigger role in spreading the word than others, right?
So it's not just about reaching everybody, it's about reaching the right people.
Exactly, precisely.
Okay, so quality over quantity when it comes to influencing tipping points.
100%.
Got it.
And Gladwell gives this really cool example.
Okay.
A gonorrhea epidemic that happened in Colorado Springs.
Really?
Yeah, so researchers were studying this outbreak, and they found that it spread,
Okay.
mostly because of this really small group of people.
Correct.
Just 168 individuals. Wow, that's a tiny number of people.
Yeah, and they were mostly concentrated in certain locations and social circles.
That's so interesting that such a small group could have such a big impact.
It is, right. And that actually ties into this concept of the 80-20 rule
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
you probably heard of,
Yeah.
which basically says that a small percentage often has a disproportionate impact on the overall outcome.
Oh, that's a good point, and that applies to way more than just epidemics, right?
Exactly. You see it everywhere. But what's even more interesting
Yeah.
is that Gladwell breaks down this few into 3 distinct types of individuals:
Okay.
connectors, mavens, and salesmen. And each of these plays a unique role in tipping the scales.
Ooh, okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these connectors, mavens, and salesmen.
All right, let's start with connectors.
Okay.
These are the people who just have a knack
Mm-hmm.
for bringing other people together,
Okay.
building bridges between different worlds and different social circles.
So, the ultimate networkers.
Exactly, yeah.
Got it.
And Gladwell uses Lois Weisberg as a prime example.
Okay.
She was known for just being incredible at connecting people, and she did it so effortlessly.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, and Gladwell even tells a story of how she once brought together
Okay.
these 3 giants of science fiction:
Okay.
Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and Robert Heinlein.
Whoa, that's a power trio.
I know, just because she knew them all and thought it'd be fun.
That's the kind of dinner party I would love to be a fly on the wall for.
I know, right?
Amazing.
She was the human catalyst for connection.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Then we had the mavens.
Okay.
So these are kind of the information specialists.
Oh, okay.
The ones who know all the best deals, the inside scoops, all the details that most people miss.
So they're walking, talking Wikipedia pages.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
They go beyond just gathering knowledge, though.
Oh, How
They're
so?
really all about sharing that information
Oh,
and helping other people navigate the world in a more effective way.
I love that.
Gladwell gives the example of Mark Alpert, a guy who can tell you, like, everything about getting the best deal,
Oh, wow.
from the best time to buy coffee to, like, the most obscure hotel rack rates.
Yeah, that's a person you want to know for sure.
Yeah, right.
Wow, that's amazing.
And then there are the salesmen.
Okay, the salesmen. Let's hear about them.
These are like the masters of persuasion,
Oh, yeah.
the ones who can convince you to do almost anything.
Interesting. So more than just knowing stuff or having connections,
Yeah.
they can actually motivate people to take action.
Exactly, yeah. And Gladwell points out that it's not just about the words they use.
Oh, okay.
It's about those subtle cues,
Hmm.
the way they make you feel.
Interesting.
You know, he talks about Tom Gow, an insurance
Mhm.
salesman who had this incredible ability
Yeah.
to make people feel good about themselves
Okay.
and optimistic about the future.
So they just create a connection that goes beyond logic or facts.
Exactly. And all of that made them more receptive to his sales pitch.
Huh. I can see how that would work.
And it's like a fascinating aspect of influence.
Yeah.
Gladwell even points to a study where they found that just a TV anchor's facial expressions
Mhm.
could sway viewers' voting decisions.
Wow, just their facial expressions.
Yeah, without a single word of the script being changed.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
It makes you think about all the subtle ways that we're being influenced without even realizing it.
Absolutely. It's crazy.
Okay, so we've got these three types of individuals who play a key role in
Yeah.
spreading ideas and behaviors. The
Yeah.
connectors, the mavens, and the salesmen.
Exactly.
But just reaching the right people is only part of it, right?
Right.
What about Gladwell's second rule, the stickiness factor?
So the stickiness factor is all about making an idea memorable,
Okay.
making sure it resonates with people.
Yeah.
So it stays with them even after they've encountered it.
Right. So it's not just about getting the message out there, it's about making sure it actually sticks.
Exactly. Exactly.
What are some of the ways that we can make messages more sticky?
Well, Gladwell uses a surprising example for this.
Oh, okay. What is it?
Sesame Street.
Wait, really? The children's show?
Yeah, Sesame Street.
Interesting.
And it turns out Sesame Street is like a master class
Right.
in creating sticky content.
Okay, I'm listening.
The creators of the show were incredibly deliberate in their approach.
Got it.
They used all this research and testing
Wow.
to make sure the show was not only educational,
Mm.
but also engaging and memorable.
So it wasn't just throwing puppets on a screen and hoping for the best.
Not at all. No.
Oh,
They did this thing called the distractor test,
what's that?
where they'd observe kids' reactions to different segments of the show.
Oh, wow.
And this actually led them to make some big changes,
Like what?
like introducing Big Bird
Oh, wow.
and limiting segments to specific lengths to keep kids' attention
Wow, they were very intentional about it.
and make sure those key lessons stuck.
I never knew that about Sesame Street.
Yeah,
It makes sense, though, to be that detail-oriented about it.
definitely.
Because you want to capture the audience's attention and hold it.
Exactly.
I bet there are parallels here with how we consume information as adults.
Absolutely makes you think, right?
Right.
What makes certain ideas or facts stick with us
Mm-hmm.
while others just fade away?
Right.
And these principles of stickiness, they're everywhere,
Yeah, I can see that.
whether we're talking about like children's television
Yeah.
or complex scientific theories,
That's a good point. Okay, so we've got the law of the few.
right?
We've got the stickiness factor.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's move on to Gladwell's third rule, the power of context. What's that all about?
So the power of context basically highlights
Yeah.
how important the environment is in shaping behavior.
Okay.
It suggests that our actions are way more influenced by our surroundings and circumstances
Mhm.
than we might even realize.
So it's not just who we are, it's where we are
Right.
and what's going on around us.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Gladwell gives a really cool example to illustrate this.
I'm ready.
The dramatic drop in crime that happened in New York City in the 90s.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
So while there were lots of factors that led to that decline,
Yeah.
there was this like puzzling gap between those long-term changes
Mm,
and how suddenly those crime rates plummeted.
that's interesting.
It seemed like something else was at play.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. What was that missing piece of the puzzle?
Well, it turns out
Yeah.
that a relatively small change in the environment actually had a huge impact.
Interesting.
It wasn't just about demographics or policing strategies.
Oh, okay.
It was about addressing what's known as the broken windows theory.
The broken windows theory, what's that?
So the theory says that visible signs of disorder,
Okay.
like graffiti, litter, abandoned buildings, can actually create an environment that encourages more serious crime.
So if a place looks neglected
Yeah.
and people see little crimes happening all the time,
Mm.
it sends a message that nobody cares.
Yeah.
And that might make people feel emboldened to do even worse stuff.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And it seems that this played a really significant role
Okay.
in turning things around in New York.
Wow.
So by focusing on cleaning up the subways,
Okay.
cracking down on fare evasion,
Right.
addressing those signs of disorder,
Yeah.
the city basically shifted the context,
Okay.
made it less conducive to crime.
Wow. That's so interesting how seemingly small details in our surroundings can
Right.
have a much bigger impact than we might think.
Exactly.
Powerful stuff.
And it actually connects to another fascinating study that Gladwell talks about,
Okay, which one?
the Stanford prison experiment.
Oh, yeah, the Stanford prison experiment. That one's always a little unsettling,
It is, yeah.
but it's such a good example of how environment can affect behavior.
Absolutely, in some really profound ways.
For those who may not be familiar, can you give us a little overview?
Sure. So in the experiment,
Yeah.
college students were randomly assigned to be either guards or prisoners
Okay.
in a fake prison.
Okay.
And the researchers wanted to see how the environment and the assigned roles
Right.
would impact their behavior.
Interesting.
And what they found was pretty disturbing.
What happened?
The students who were assigned as guards
Yeah.
started acting in really authoritarian and even abusive ways.
Really?
Yeah, while the prisoners became passive and withdrawn.
Oh, wow. They had to shut down the experiment early, right?
They did, yeah. Things got way out of control.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's pretty intense.
But it really highlights how powerful context can be.
It really does, yeah.
So we've got these 3 rules of tipping points.
Mm-hmm.
The law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context. Now that we've
Yeah.
laid that groundwork.
Yeah. I think we're ready to dig into some of those really compelling examples.
Yeah, I was just thinking that Gladwell uses.
I love seeing how these theories apply in real life.
Totally.
So what examples are we going to look at?
Well, Gladwell uses a whole bunch of different examples to illustrate these tipping points
Okay.
and how those 3 rules kind of work together.
Right.
One that always stands out to me
Yeah.
is the story of hush puppies.
Hush puppies, like those suede shoes?
Yeah, exactly. Those.
Okay.
In the mid-90s, they went from being kind of this dated brand
Right.
to suddenly becoming super trendy, like almost overnight.
Yeah. I remember that everyone was wearing them.
I know, right? And it all started
Yeah.
with this small group of trendsetters in New York City's East Village.
Okay.
They started wearing hush puppies,
Okay.
almost ironically, because they were seen as uncool.
So it was like, so uncool, it's cool.
Oh, exactly.
I can see that. Sometimes going against the grain is how you make a statement.
Oh,
Totally. And as these early adopters started wearing hush puppies,
yeah.
it caught the attention of fashion designers.
Okay.
And eventually, it made its way into the mainstream.
So it's like a perfect example of the law of the few at work,
Right.
with just a small group of connectors sparking this much larger trend.
Exactly.
That's wild that just a few people in a specific niche
Right.
can have such a ripple effect.
It really is. And Gladwell also talks about some examples
Okay.
that are deal with some more serious topics.
Okay. Like what?
Like the Micronesian suicide epidemic.
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. I
Yeah.
remember hearing about that.
So in the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
suicide rates among young men in Micronesia just skyrocketed.
Wow.
It was really disturbing how common it became.
What led to that?
Well, the origins are super complex,
Okay.
but it seems to have started with a few highly publicized suicides,
Okay.
and especially suicides of people who were seen as really charismatic or influential.
Oh, wow.
And as these tragic events got more attention,
Mhm.
it seems like they created this sense of, I don't know, permission or acceptance
Okay.
for suicide as a response to even minor setbacks.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
So it's almost like suicide became a more normalized response
Yeah.
to life's challenges, which is so sad.
It's really tragic, and it kind of points to this idea of permission givers,
Okay.
those individuals, often in visible positions,
Yeah.
whose actions kind of shape the perception of what's acceptable behavior.
Makes you think about the responsibility that comes with having influence.
Right, even if it's unintended.
Rick?
Gladwell's example of the rise and fall of smoking
Okay.
also gives us a really interesting perspective
Okay.
on how contagiousness and stickiness play together.
Right. Smoking's definitely a habit with a complicated history.
Totally.
So how do tipping points fit into that?
Well, Gladwell says that the initial uptake of smoking
Okay.
might be driven by the law of the few.
Mm.
Think about those cool kids in high school.
Right.
They might be the ones who give others permission to light up.
Right, making it seem cool and rebellious.
Exactly. But the stickiness of smoking,
Mm.
the reason people keep coming back to it even though they know it's bad for them,
Right.
is tied to something else, nicotine.
Right. It's incredibly addictive.
Yeah.
So hard to quit.
But what's interesting is that Gladwell talks about this group of people called chippers.
Chippers. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, so these are individuals who
Okay.
smoke regularly,
Okay.
but they never get fully addicted.
Oh, interesting.
They might have a few cigarettes a week
Oh.
or even a day,
Okay.
but they don't experience those really intense cravings or
Yeah.
withdrawal symptoms that heavily addicted smokers do.
So they're able to control their smoking in a way
Yeah.
that most smokers can't.
It seems that way, yeah.
Huh.
It kind of suggests that the stickiness of smoking isn't uniform.
Oh, interesting.
There are probably genetic and other factors
Yeah.
that make some people more susceptible to nicotine than others.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So even with something as addictive as nicotine,
Yeah.
there's still variation in how people respond to it.
Exactly. And it brings up these really interesting questions
Right?
about addiction and how we approach it.
Right.
Gladwell points out that, like, those traditional anti-smoking campaigns,
Yeah.
they often try to scare teenagers by talking about all the health risks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But he thinks this approach might backfire in some cases
Really? Why?
because teenagers are kind of rebellious by nature.
Okay.
So they're more likely to do things that adults tell them not to do.
Right.
So by emphasizing the health risks,
Yeah.
you might unintentionally make smoking seem more appealing.
Huh. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, right?
Okay.
It shows you just how complex human behavior is.
Absolutely.
And how important it is to really understand the nuances of context
Yeah.
and how they impact people's choices.
I love that. What's so interesting about all these examples,
Yeah.
from hush puppies to suicide to smoke, is how small changes or events can have this massive impact.
Like that butterfly effect, you know?
Yeah, exactly. One little flap of a butterfly's wings can cause a hurricane.
Totally. And these tipping points remind us that the world is really sensitive to even the smallest changes.
So much more than we realize.
Exactly.
So what does all this mean for us? How can we apply this knowledge about tipping points to our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
We've talked a lot about these tipping point concepts.
Yeah.
But how can we actually use this knowledge
Mm-hmm.
to make a difference out there in the real world?
Right. It's one thing to understand the theory,
Yeah, totally.
but it's another to actually put it into practice.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So by understanding these principles,
Yeah.
the law of the few,
Mm.
the stickiness factor, the power of context,
Mm-hmm.
we can become way more effective
Okay.
at spreading ideas,
Yeah.
influencing behavior,
Right.
maybe even sparking some positive change.
Love that. So, practical takeaways.
Okay, yeah.
How can we become more effective, like you said?
Well, let's go back to those 3 rules
Okay.
and think about how they could be applied.
Perfect.
So first, think about the people in your own networks,
Mm-hmm.
both personal and professional.
Okay.
Are there people who kind of the description
Yeah.
of connectors, mavens, or salesmen?
Okay.
Those people who bring others together,
Right.
share valuable info,
Mm-hmm.
inspire people to take action.
So it's about being aware of the different types of influence
Yeah.
that are already all around us.
Exactly. So identifying and engaging these folks
Okay.
can be a game changer
Right.
when you're trying to spread a message
Or
or make a difference somehow.
it's like you're building a team.
Exactly.
Each person brings their own strengths.
I love that analogy, building a team for social change.
All right. So first, we assemble the squad.
Right.
Then what?
Then we got to think about the stickiness factor.
Okay. Yeah, that's important.
How can we make our ideas more memorable, more impactful?
Yeah.
There are tons of different ways to do this.
Okay.
Depends on the situation,
Right.
your communication style. Could you use storytelling or visuals
Oh, good point.
or maybe a little humor even?
Right. You want that message to stick?
Yeah, to help it resonate
Mm-hmm.
and stay with people.
It's like writing a catchy song, you know?
Oh, yeah. I see what you
You
mean.
want something that'll stick in people's heads,
Totally.
that they'll remember after they've heard it.
You want those earworm ideas.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got our team.
Right.
We've got our catchy message.
Mhm.
What's the third piece?
Don't forget about the power of context.
Oh, right.
The environment where you present your ideas
Okay.
can make a huge difference.
Right, because context is everything.
It really is. Think about how you could create the right setting,
Yeah.
the right mood.
So it's like setting the stage for success, right?
Exactly.
Yes, like a play needs the right lighting and set design. Our ideas might need a little help to really shine.
Exactly. I love that.
Awesome. So much good stuff to think about here.
Yeah, for sure.
I know, right?
So with all this in mind, I'm going to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
Knowing these 3 rules of tipping points,
Yeah.
are there areas in your own life
Oh, interesting.
where you could create a positive tipping point?
Love it.
What changes could you make? What people could you get involved?
Mm.
How could you create that ripple effect
Right.
that leads to meaningful change?
Powerful.
Whether it's in your work, your community, your personal goals, even.
That's such a good question to think about.
Right.
It really drives home the point
Yeah.
that this whole deep dive hasn't just been about theory.
Right.
It's been about empowering us to become agents of change
I love that. Yeah.
out in the world.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by everything going on in the world.
Totally.
But Gladwell reminds us
Yeah.
that even those tiny little actions,
Mm.
when they're used strategically, can have a huge impact.
It all comes back to that image of the folded paper
Yeah.
reaching all the way to the sun.
Absolutely.
Maybe with a little understanding of these tipping point principles,
Right.
we can all unfold our own ideas and efforts
I love that.
and create a world that's a little brighter,
Yeah.
a little more awesome.
Totally.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was awesome.
Until next time,
Yeah.
keep those minds curious
Definitely.
and keep those tipping points in mind.
Absolutely.